Babafururu erereo, owo kanyenye eleibo, eleri fumbati wasao, eibo rere bati wao, enuwa ye yagwao, eyakweloro. Iamile orum.
Hello, my name is Maya Angelou. In a previous program, we discussed, or rather I talked about, Africanisms, positive Africanisms, then negative Africanisms, finally African history. And in this program I'm going to discuss when teaching African history can be construed as a negative effort. If a teacher teaches African history, the glory that was Africa, the pageantry, the beauty that was Africa, and leaves out the other side, that teacher is half arming that student. So the student goes out into the world, encounters an opposition that is totally armed, and when they have a confrontation, the student is wiped out. The student then turns to feel that Africa has betrayed him, when the fact of the matter is that the teacher has betrayed him. The teacher is the culprit in this case. It is important that Black Americans understand today that we must not rather fall into that trap of being subhuman or superhuman, being either the Martin Luther King type or a thug in the street. We are human beings. We have human reactions. We have been as good as any human being can be, and we have been as bad as any human being can be. And I leave that to you to decide upon what I mean by good and bad. Mr. Sterling Brown, a great writer, fortunately who is still alive, wrote a poem that tells a story about our history. The poem says, "They dragged you from homeland. They chained you in coffles. They huddled you, spoon fashion, in filthy hatches. They sold you to give a few gentlemen ease. They broke you in like oxen. They scourged you. They branded you. They made your women breeders. They swelled your numbers with bastards. They taught you the religion they disgraced. You sang, 'Keep a inching along like a pole inchworm.' You sang, 'By and by, I'm going to lay down this heavy load.' You sang, 'Walk together, children. Don't you get weary. The strong men keep coming on. The strong men get stronger.' They point with pride to the roads you built for them. They ride in comfort over the rails you laid for them. They put hammers in your hands and said, 'Drive so much before sundown.' And you sang, 'Ain't no hammer in this land can ring like mine, baby. Ring like mine.' They cooped you in their kitchens. They penned you in their factories. They gave you the jobs that they were too good for. They tried to guarantee happiness for themselves by shunting dirt and misery off on you. And you sang, 'Me and my baby gonna shine, shine. Me and my baby gonna shine.' They bought off some of your leaders. You stumbled, as blind men will. They coaxed you, unwantedly soft-voiced. You followed away, then you laughed, as usual. They heard the laugh and wondered, uncomfortable, unadmitting a deeper terror. The strong men coming on, the strong men getting stronger. What from the slums where they have penned you? What from the tiny huts they could not keep from you? What reaches them, makes them ill at ease and fearful? Today they shout prohibition at you. Thou shalt not this, thou shalt not that, reserved for whites only. You laugh. There's only one thing they cannot prohibit: the strong men coming on, the strong men getting stronger, strong men stronger, stronger, stronger. That's a story. That's your story. It's my story. I wonder, I would like very much to see that story told in pictures. Let's see it told in pictures.
Ooh-hoo, hoo-doo, yeah, freedom. Ooh-hoo, hoo-doo, yeah, freedom. Ooh-hoo, hoo-doo, yeah, freedom. Mm-hmm. 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 Osawaba huru, osawaba huru, osawaba huru, yeah, oh yeah, freedom. Mm-hmm. 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 Ooh, hoodoo, yeah, freedom. Ooh, hoodoo, yeah, freedom. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Strong men.
Ooh, hoodoo, yeah, freedom. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Strong men.
Mm-hmm. Osawaba hoodoo, osawaba hoodoo, osawaba hoodoo, yeah, oh yeah, freedom. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
Strong men getting stronger. They dragged you from your homeland. Ooh, ooh, ooh. They chained you in coffles. Ooh, 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 They huddled you in filthy hatches, spoon fashion. Ooh, ooh, ooh. They sold you to give a few gentlemen ease. Ooh, 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 before I'll be a slave. Ooh, they broke you in like oxen. Ooh, 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 and go home to my God and be free. Ooh, 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 ooh. They made your women breeders. Ooh, 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 branded you. Ooh, swelled your numbers with bastards. Ooh, 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 They point with pride to the roads you built for them, King Cotton. They gave you the jobs that they were too good for. Freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me and before. They ride in comfort over the rails you laid for them. Oh, freedom. Oh, today they shout prohibition at you. Ooh, thou shalt not this. Ooh, thou shalt not that. Ooh, I'll be buried in my grave and go home. No more chain gang, no more chain gang, no more chain gang over me. I lived that before I'll be a slave. They tried to guarantee happiness to themselves. By shunting dirt and misery off on you. But before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my God and be free. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. Say that before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave, and then I'll go home to my God and be free. No more lynching, no more crying, no more moaning over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave, and then I'll go home to my God and be free. Oh, oh, freedom, oh, oh, freedom, oh, oh, freedom over me. I said that before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'll go home to my God and be free. Oh, no more meanness. Oh, no more vileness. Oh, no more anger over me. That before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'll go home to my God to be free. Oh, oh, freedom. Oh, oh, freedom. Oh, oh, freedom over me. That before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my God and be free. Ooh, freedom. The strong men keep coming on. The strong men get stronger, all the time stronger. Stronger not in spite of the history, but stronger because of the history, because of the negatives as well as the positives. Imperative that you understand it. Around the states now, there are popping up dress shops, design shops, jewelry shops, art galleries, with black Americans finding some direct way back to the African heritage. It's imperative that those people understand when they say this dress is an African design, they must be sure whether it is an African design or an African influenced design. Now both are good, neither is better than the other. But if we are really going to teach African history, we must be able to say this dress is a traditional dress. This earring is a traditional earring. This is used by a chief. This has been influenced. It's imperative. Now, in San Francisco, we went to a shop, the Bayete shop, and we found not only in African-influenced dresses, jewelry, objects of art, musical instruments, but we also found the traditional ones. Al, you're really a survival. You're not a revival if you can carve ivory and carry on like that. I want to ask Pat, do you have a business arrangement with people in Africa? I mean, were they your friends at
From the beginning, they were our friends, yes.
I see.
And now we have more or less a business arrangement.
We are in the Bayete shop on Fillmore Street. The shop is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Roberts. Now, this is Al Roberts.
Hi.
And this is Pat Roberts.
Hello there.
We were wondering, we're dealing with African revivals in the United States, and the wearing of cloth is a cultural revival. So we were wondering, how did you get into the business in the first place?
Well, we saw the need to bring awareness to the young black people of today. There has been taught for many, many years the feeling that black people had no culture, no heritage, and as a matter of fact that the continent of Africa itself was a continent of barbarians. We are trying to dispel that image, and one of the easiest ways that we've found to do it is to bring the art and the craft of Africa home to American black people.
I'll say maybe about 1% of our customers have been to Africa.
Good, great.
And they've just been influenced by coming into the shop and knowledge, of Africa. I don't know what it is now that's bringing this awareness other than what we're contributing and along with a few other things, but only about 1% I would think.
You yourself have never been, is it?
I've never been to Africa.
And neither has Al?
No.
Well, you'll be so welcome. You'll walk down the street and people will never know. They'll start speaking to you in Fanti or Swahili or something. And because you look a typical African lady.
Well, I've been told this by many.
That's right. Now, Lula is wearing a dress here.
Shikari,
Yes.
Shikari cloth
Yes.
from the Shikari tribe in East Africa.
That's a beautiful cloth. And you, too, look like a typical African lady who's about to go shopping to the market. Well, she might not walk quite that commercially, but I think there's a natural grace that Africans and black Americans have, or Africans at home and Africans abroad. And we find that our models don't have to wear books on their heads for 2 years in order to walk comfortably. And I believe that's because we have spent centuries with things on our heads. We have a natural kind of grace, and it's shown very much in Lula here.
The people who come in to look out of curiosity and this sort of thing try on something, and immediately they change their bearing completely.
Really?
They become quite regal and stately, and they just feel kind of good wearing the clothes, and they generally wind up walking out in something.
Now, Al, I'm interested in that figure on the very end of the second shelf. Will you tell us about it?
Yes, that piece, Maya, is from Kenya. It's a representation of a musician, and the idea is that this fellow has become so involved in what he's doing that he's become like a part of his instrument.
Oh, that's fantastic. What about this second piece?
That's a stool or a bowl, a centerpiece. It's hollow in the top, and it can have food in it, and it's from the Kam tribe in West Cameroon. That piece is quite special. It's a Haitian piece from Haiti, and as you know, Haiti is a black country also. And that is a very, very special carving in that it's used in rituals and this sort of thing. I'm not familiar with that, but I've heard a lot about it.
The African art has influenced the United States, South America, the Caribbean, to such an extent that it would be difficult to separate black influence from the world stage. We thank very much the proprietors of the Bayete shop. We're proud of the resurgence of interest in African affairs, in African cloth, in African jewelry, and mostly in African soul. Yes, we are in new days. We are in new times. When we look at African history and understand that history is today, tomorrow, today will be history, not so? Then we have to see it as one. We must see what we did as what we do. We should almost be able to speak in the present tense of 300 years ago, of 600 years ago, of 1,000 years ago, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years ago. In In Africa, slavery was an African institution before the coming of the white man. We must understand that so that we don't go around romanticizing slavery. Wherever it wasn't right. But let's look at what kind of slavery. Slavery in Africa was a different being, but it was slavery. A slave could inherit. A slave could marry into the family. A slave could, in fact, become a part of the family, and oftentimes did. A slave was often a slave because his family or he himself owed a debt, or maybe he was a prize of a war. But he was a slave. No matter how nice it was, that is to say, how much more human, which is a fact, it was than, say, what took place in America. Still, when a man does not have total mobility, when the man cannot determine and direct his own destiny, that's slavery, Jack. Any way you look at it, any way you cut it. That's a fact. It is a fact that from the time when Mpanda with the Zulus betrayed his leader, we have seen down the line Africans and Black Americans and West Indians and Haitians and South Americans who have betrayed each other. These are facts, who have in fact either killed or allowed to be sent into exile, like Dr. Du Bois, like Marcus Garvey, like Toussaint Louverture. We've allowed our men to be sent into slavery and sat back and said, oh, well, everything's going to come out all right. Well, I think these are things we better look at very seriously. When a person says he's made no mistakes, as I said before, he goes on to decide then he can make no mistakes. And that's the end of growth. That's the end of progress. We must be able to take it all, the bitter and the sweet, stir it all up and drink it, Jim. I'm going to tell you a poem. I quite often do on these programs, get a chance to say some of my own poetry. This is a poem called A Letter to an Aspiring Junkie. Let me hip you to the streets, Jim. Ain't nothing happening. Maybe some tomorrow's gone up in smoke. Raggedy preachers telling a joke to lonely, sunless old ladies' maids. Nothing happening. No haps, baby. Oh, there's a slew of young cats riding that cold white horse. A gray old monkey on their back, of course, does rodeo tricks. No haps, baby. No haps. There's an old-time pimp with a space-age conch setting up some fool for a game of tonk or poker or get 'em dead and alive. The streets, climbing the streets like you can't climb in the rear end of a lion. Then it's fine. It's a boogaloo and it's a shing-a-ling. It's African dreams on a buck and a wing and a prayer. That's the streets, Jim. Nothing happening. Can you dig it?
My brothers and sisters were bid off first, and one by one, while my mother, paralyzed by grief, held me by the hand. Her turn came, and she was bought by Isaac Riley of Montgomery County. Then I was offered to the assembled purchasers. My mother, half distracted with the thought of parting forever from all her children, pushed to the crowd while the bidding for me was going on, to the spot where Riley was standing. She fell at his feet and clung to his knees, entreating him in tones that only a mother could command, to buy her baby as well as herself and spare her one, at least, of her little ones. Will it? Can it be believed that this man thus appealed to was capable not merely of turning a deaf ear to her supplication, but of disengaging himself from her with such violent blows and kicks as to reduce her to the necessity of creeping out of his reach and mingling the groan of bodily suffering with the sob of a breaking heart? As she crawled away from the brutal man, I heard her sob out,
Lord, how long? How long? How long, Lord?
I must have been between 5 and 6 years old. I seemed to see and hear my poor mother weeping now. This was one of my earliest observations of men, an experience which I only shared with thousands of my race. the bitterness of which to an individual who suffers it cannot be diminished by the frequency of its reoccurrence, while it is dark enough to overshadow the whole afterlife with something blacker than a funeral pall.
That was an excerpt from a book written by Josiah Henson around 1840. Josiah Henson is credited with having been the inspiration for Harriet Beecher Stowe's famous, some people feel infamous, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Mr. Lothario Lotho read that excerpt. We have some friends in the studio this evening. I'd like to introduce them to you. First, Mr. Glenn Battle, an actor and a dancer. Next, we have Mr. James Bircher, quite a famous Bay Area painter and a writer, but a silent one for himself. Next, we have Mr. Willie Kotzitsile, whom you met before, who is a very well-known and a very great South African poet. And here we have little Miss Pamela Johnson, who you may have seen on one of the other programs, who's very bright, articulate, and is a little princess. And next we have a great beauty, Miss Karen Richardson, who is the daughter of Mr. Julian and Mrs. Raye Richardson of the Success Bookstore in San Francisco. And there again is Lothario Lotho on the end. Now, gentlemen and ladies, you've watched the programs so far, and especially the ones dealing with African history. I'd like to ask you first, nobody in particular, just talk. What do you think is the importance of Black Americans dealing with African history? Karen.
Well, isn't I believe the whole reason that history is taught in the schools, or American history is taught to us, is so that the children will be able to relate to the country, or relate to something that, first of all, they are told is great or is beautiful, and in a relationship with their ancestors or with their forefathers, they can therefore participate in its founding. Whereas a black student who is only taught European history and has no knowledge of African history cannot relate to that country.
Yes, I see. Tell me, Lothario, until when did you start learning anything about African history?
Well, I studied a little history while I was going to high school, but I first actually started learning about African history at Merritt College, where the program that's now going on throughout the country was first initiated. And I was particularly interested in the culture of Africa because I related to it, even though there had been a void. By that I mean that the student in my time when I was coming up, he didn't relate to Africa. He said, oh man, what you talking about? I'm African, or I'm black, you know, I'm not no African, you know, I'm a Negro. Where he didn't relate to Africa because he was not aware of the greatness of Africa. All he had seen through the movies and projected through books and Tarzan and this type of super image was just a tribal brother running around with a spear, you know, through the jungle, climbing trees, you know. So this let me see a little more of Africa and understand that we had great civilizations and that Africa also was where the life began, where man originated. It helped me a lot.
Tell me something, Mr. Battle. What do you think can happen to a people if they have no understanding of their past?
Well, there is no motivation for future successes. I was listening to Lothario, and I was thinking, I was at Howard in 1952 and 3, and I was fortunate enough to be living with Dr. John Hope Franklin when he was writing From Slavery, Negro Travels in the North and From Slavery to Freedom. And he, at the time, was living in who wrote Black Bourgeois,
Dr. E. Franklin Frazier.
Dr. E. Franklin Frazier's house, and Mrs. Frazier had collected all these African artifacts. Although, of course, I was young and from the South, and I saw these things, and they meant nothing really to me. I mean, artistically. But as I grew older, I got to see the significance and understand the significance of from Negro Travels in the North, from Slavery to Freedom, and the various other books that were written by Woodson and the various other authors. I was quite fortunate in having this background, and that Howard and Lincoln and the Negro schools on the East Coast have this FISC.
Very good. Well, let me just skip Mr. Bircher for a minute and ask Willie Kotzitsile, who is from South Africa, to show us the parallel in the South African school system and the American school system as far as blacks are concerned.
As far as black people are concerned, the educational systems in various countries or nations where European refugees, let's say, had either taken over the country or taken the African out of the continent to another country, that the educational system was designed to cut the African off from the past, and those few things that they considered African history that they would teach us in South Africa were such that we would immediately develop feelings of inferiority and insecurity and despise ourselves. And if they could do this, as they did in America and almost very successfully did in Africa, is that the black man ends up cut off from his spiritual roots, from whatever powerful forces of continuity would enable him to see his future with any clarity.
That's true. I also remember a South African friend telling me that he learned to sing a song called Piccadilly, That's My Home, Piccadilly, That's My Home, and he said he sang it for years. Right. Years later, this man became quite a well-known lawyer, and he traveled to England and spent some time in London, and he saw Piccadilly Square. And he thought all these years he'd been singing Piccadilly, that's his home. Let me ask Mr. Bircher, who is an artist, have you been influenced particularly by what you've learned of African art in the recent years?
Yeah, I would say greatly so. I would say to the extent that the majority of my work is involved around black people, black subject matter, life of black Americans, and the things which I feel are relevant to us as a people that could be portrayed through art. The beautiful symmetry in African sculpture, the rhythm that our people have is carried throughout our art, and in some manner I try to portray this in my work.
I see. I want to come back and talk more about that, but let's ask little Miss Pamela. The other day when I was talking with her, she explained to me how peoples came about, and she said something about certain people in Africa had started off eating as they traveled. The foods they had more melanin and less keratin and so forth. Will you explain that to me?
Well, the people began in one particular spot, and they spread all over Africa in different directions. Some people went this way, others went another, and as they moved, the foods became different because they grew in different climates, and so they made good of what they had there. And what they ate contained more melanin in some parts and more keratin in others. And this is, the melanin made their skin darker and the keratin made their skin lighter. And in different places, their skin was lighter, and then others it was darker, and others they had different shades of all kinds of colors.
I see. Well, thank you very much. That's probably our only scientific explanation of the day. Now, tell me something else while we're talking to you, Karen. Your parents, I know, have taught you these facts. In the schools the school you go to, do you find many Black American children who know anything of their past?
Most of them I've run into, they don't know anything, and they aren't really concerned about anything.
You think they aren't concerned, or is it made to seem kind of dull?
More or less, I think they just don't know that it's there.
I see. Well, are you doing anything personally? I mean, do you try to explain to your friends something about African history?
No, not really.
Not really, no, because you don't want to be put down, probably. Your mother is doing a good work, though. That's all right. Please, let's go back to Karen Richardson. Karen, you started off by explaining to us why history is taught. Will you just enlarge on that a bit? I mean in this way, when white students consider European history, they can enclose into their own achievement a total identification with whether it was Galileo or whether it was a French inventor or writer or philosopher. They can do this. Who do you know in French, or do you know anyone in the French history that was African that we can identify with?
No, because not as on a fault of that I hadn't been taught French history, because I had been taught European history. And as a matter of fact, in high school, one of my majors was history, but I did not like history because it was just a confrontation with historical dates that in no way related to me. At the time, of course, I didn't use this as an excuse to get the bad grades in it that I did, but it had no interest, it had no color.
Yes.
Literally.
Literally and figuratively.
and not only was I not made aware of my own participation in this country's heritage, because the history of black people is the history of America, but in studying world history, it was only Europe and England, and everything was taught through the eyes of the English world. And even in this, there was a hypocrisy of actual facts, because there we couldn't even see the impression that black people had made upon European history.
Yes,
so we were even wiped out of there.
Yes.
So I couldn't relate at all.
Well, let me just give you a couple of names of people who were of African descent. Dumas, both father and son, obviously, were Alexander Dumas, who wrote The Three Musketeers, was of African descent, and so was Colette, of African descent. And you can check it in any library. So that's sort of nice to know when you hear about French literature, and these people have influenced French literature. Pushkin, of course, you know that, yes, that Pushkin was of African descent in Russia. It is said, I wasn't able to find the particular volume that documents this, that it is said that Sappho, one of the greatest poets, female poets of Greek history, was of African descent. Now, the only thing I can find in the libraries out here on the West Coast are statements that her brother, Charaxmus, married an African. But it doesn't say that she was. But she was a very great poet. She developed the Sapphic verse, which is a particular kind of rhythm. And I tend to think it's so. It's said of her that the coins that were minted of her head, that were struck, showed the African features and the big woolly hair. I don't know many Europeans who have that big woolly hair if they haven't got African blood. let me go back then and ask Mr. Bircher to talk to us some more about African art and Black American art. Are many Black American artists today, graphic artists, being influenced directly by African art, would you say?
Well, I would say more so by Black consciousness, the events that are happening now, that are definitely bad in the country, cause a lot of people to want to depict it, I suppose, But I think one historical thing that you can't get away from in our people is the fact that we've been able to live throughout the slave system and some of the bad systems that are imposed upon us now because we're balanced people. We're able to withstand a lot of conditions that other races of people, say the Indians, weren't able to withstand. So, I mean, that balance, that sense of rhythm that has been carried throughout the years, it also belongs to the artists, the Black artists of this time. And I find in studying African art that the rhythmic progression, the fact that an African carver carve a piece of sculpture with both his hands and have it come out perfect and symmetrical. By symmetrical, I mean, even on both sides. It's kind of relates to a balance, a sense of balance, and I find that many Black artists in this way relate to African art through their balance, through their wanting to depict situations as they are.
Do you know the work of Bailey, the Black American painter? He did most recently, his most famous piece of work is a poster that was done for Reverend Martin Luther King's SCLC. That poster with Reverend King in the center and all those black faces around him.
Right.
That was done by a painter named Bailey, who's quite young. He's teaching down south in some black school now, and he was in Ghana for a number of years. So, and he's a student of Charles White.
Oh, is he?
Yes. I'm sure we all know his work.
Right.
Now, let me go back to Lothario, who's an actor, as everyone can determine, and tell us something about your understanding of African art forms and drama. Have you been introduced to African drama?
Well, I've taken drama. I had a black drama course at Murray College where we performed Saga of a Black Man, which was written by Miss Sarah Fabio, who's the instructor there. However, in formal education, I haven't been introduced to African art at all. I attended University of California and take drama there, but it's dealing more with that European tradition, Shakespearean type theories are evolved in this theater. And also I go to ACT now in the summertime. They have a training program there at the Congress. And it deals with technique and method, but as far as actually seeing African techniques or even studying fables, I've read these things on my own, tales and things of this nature. I've never actually been exposed to it.
Well, I think that little as we know, we are exposed to it. When we go to black churches, we are exposed to black drama. That's it. In West Africa, all art, all forms of art are participation forms. In the churches, as we know, as soon as the minister starts, he says, "Now, brothers and sisters," everybody says, "Yeah, amen, that's right." And you can hear the kind of the rhythmic pushing him on. Get on to it, and so forth. Well, in Ghana, where I live, if I have friends over, I invite a storyteller, the best in the neighborhood, and he comes with his drummers. All my friends sit, all the old people, young, the children from around, we sit in my compound. And then the storyteller starts to tell a story that everyone knows, like a Brer Rabbit story or an Anansi story. But first he says, this part of the yard, these are the old people. This part of the yard, these are the children. This part are the singers, and this part are the dancers. So then he starts to tell his story. And as he gets into it, he says, and then the dancers came forward. And it doesn't matter whether it's old people, young, whatever. All those people he has designated as dancers have to come forward, and they do their dance. And they move back. And the singers, and everyone knows the story. He's called upon to tell the story only because he has more punch to it, like some of our good Baptist ministers who can really turn you around. I think that the importance of teaching African history, I'm coming back to you, Pamela. You've been particularly lucky blessed, let me say, because in the system, the school system, there have been no arrangements made for you to get some backbone, put some starch in your backbone for your future. Fortunately, I say you've been blessed by your mother and father and your environment, which feeds you. But can you imagine, can you try to make up for me a story of what would happen to you if you didn't know who you were? If you looked in the mirror every morning and you saw this little brown face and everybody thought it was so ugly, what do you think would happen to you?
Well, you wouldn't think very much of yourself, and you think, you were nothing and nobody cared for you or anything. You didn't have any history, no background. You couldn't go forward because you didn't really know what had happened to you before. Before the time, in history, before even that century, or what your people had done, so you could be there that day or whenever it was.
Aha! I think she has put her finger on something very important. You are love. Yes, when you can identify with history, you are there that day. That is true. That is very true. Now, before we just move into a sort of close, I'm concerned with our people learning African history. I do not simply mean the glorious past. I don't just mean that. I mean also the inglorious past. Now, that is to say, if a people believe they have made no mistakes, then they go on to say they can never make any mistakes. And that means that rules out the chance of growth. We have got to be able to deal with a truth in our history, whether it's painful or pleasant. We have, for instance, it is a fact that is documented not only by European history, but by the African oral history, that there were chiefs who sold people, that the economy was based for quite a long time on the slave trade itself. Now, these are painful facts for us to deal with, but they are necessary. We've got to be brutally honest. What do you think about that, Karen Richardson?
I know that that's true, and that actually slavery was already in Europe was already in Africa when the Europeans got there. But can I make a point about you never refer to it as Negro history, and this is because there is no history of Negroes. Negro was the race given these people when they stepped into the United States. Therefore, you could not go back to Africa for it.
I think that's a very good point. Now, usually I use the word black or African or Afro-American. Negro, I don't find it personally an insult. I think I've moved beyond that. I'd like to think so. I don't like the word, that is to say I don't use it often. But when we find out people do use it, let's not put them down for it. Realize that's a stage, that's cool. It's just a matter of time before they will drop that too. But we have a great black American history that started from 1619. Some fantastic achievements, beautiful achievements, and some painful achievements, some betrayals. Nat Turner, Gabriel Prosser, all the leaders of the slave revolts were in fact betrayed by black men. That's painful. It's necessary to look at Malcolm X's death. It's necessary to look at Paul Robeson's exile. It's necessary to look at Dr. Du Bois's exile and subsequent death to see that these are people who were exiled by the whites, but we never moved behind them to support them. This is important and it's painful, but we've got to look at it. At the same time, balancing it, we must look at the positives. We must look at these people, Gabriel Prosser, who led one of the greatest slave revolts in the United States, was, when he was caught, the whites for miles around said he couldn't have done it. He was so nice. Well, he was just a nice nigger. He couldn't have done anything like that. When the truth of the matter is he had been planning it for 4 years. We have his diary. We have the diary of Denmark Vesey. And Vesey, even his owner said that's impossible. Couldn't be Vesey. But a black man is the one who turned him in. The Africans in Ghana, there's a statement, it's also said in Yoruba, but I don't speak Yoruba. They say, the trouble for the thief is not how to steal the bugle, but where to blow it. That's pretty heavy. And in the black Americans say, remember, no matter what your history has been, there's a tomorrow. They say, tired don't mean lazy, and every goodbye ain't gone. And if that's not tough enough, I don't know what. I think that on that positive note, I'd like to say thank you very much to Pamela Johnson, to Karen Richardson, to Lothario Lotho, to Glenn Battle, to James Bircher, and to Willie Kotsitsile. Thank you very much, and thank you very much.
Babafururu erereo, owo kanyenye eleibo, eleri fumbati wasao, eibo rere bati wao, enuwa ye iagwao, eiaqueloro. Iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, iamile, orun, iapopoade, o de mi saramabo, iamile, orun, i